Hello again, I'm Adam Fairclough, aka EvilBoris, and I am going to be taking a look at Forza Horizon 4 here for HDTV test today. So let's start off and jump straight into the game. So when we first boot up the title, we're actually going to be presented with a whole bunch of settings for video. Well, when I say a whole bunch, two. We've got an HDR Whitepoint setting, which goes from 400 nits all the way up to 10,000, which is quite common in Microsoft first-party titles. They work with that full 10,000 nit value for some reason, although nobody's ever probably seen a display running at 10,000 nits. One of the interesting things just to note with this that we've seen from analysing the data is that the lower we set this, actually the higher the overall brightness. It actually increases the average picture level a little bit as well. So I'm going to leave it on 10,000. It doesn't really make a huge significant difference, but if you're wondering why you may be getting some inconsistency, you'll see it certainly in the in-game part. If we adjust the settings there, you'll see the game changing in the background. So HDR Whitepoint, we're going to set that to whatever it describes. So as most games do, the little Forza Horizon logo there, you adjust that until it basically disappears. And that number should broadly match up with other titles and the capabilities of your display. Depends on the display, so this is a good way to estimate it, and it's not necessarily what your display can achieve. If you find that you're typically settling on around about 4,000, you're going to find that most games, if there's no errors in the way those games have been made, you're also going to end up on 4,000 as well, because this is a standardized method of testing. If you're unsure where it needs to be and you're unable to maybe determine exactly where that disappears, I would always go a little bit higher. You're better off going a little bit higher than a little bit lower, because this is just going to control the tone mapping at the top end of the image, but also your display is going to do the same thing anyway. So you can't really have it too high. If you're really unsure, if you're struggling to ever get a game to look quite right, HDR Whitepoint, you can max that out. The only time that you may notice that doesn't look quite right is you might be aware of clipping on the peak whites. Some displays will actually do a hard clip, and other displays will do a slight roll off. And it's more common for a game to do a little bit of a roll off than to do a hard clip, so you might get a slightly softer finish around peak brightness, around the sun, and in other places. HDR Brightness, spent a lot of time looking at this. We see this more and more in games now where we've got the white point setting, which controls the top part of the image. Some titles we see a black point setting, which is probably less useful, but it's nice to have. And then we see other games that either have a paper white setting or a brightness setting, or sometimes even both. So looking at what the HDR brightness setting is actually doing, this is behaving in a very similar way to the paper white settings that we see in games. So the paper white, if you're not familiar with it, you're kind of designating how bright should something in the game world be if it was a piece of paper in its lighting conditions. So it's not something that's producing light, it's not something that's very reflective, it's a matte white surface. So a piece of paper, a piece of cloth, those types of things. Forza Horizon 4, when we're at 50 here, this is broadly the equivalent of about 300 nits of paper white, which is reasonably high actually, if we're honest. It's quite a bright value. Typically wouldn't see that in a film, but we're seeing it quite often in games as the kind of default recommendation or the way the game is actually configured internally. So this is going to give us a really bright, easy to look at image. However, what happens as we increase the paper white brightness is we actually increase the near black shadow details and make those lighter, and we make those grayer actually. So sometimes titles might look a little bit less punchy than they perhaps should do. And also if we're overall brightening the image, this actually reduces contrast overall anyway. Not only does it reduce contrast overall because we're making the darker parts of the image a little bit lighter, but it also means that displays, which can only ever distribute a certain amount of luminance across their entire panel anyway, are actually using up more of their capability to illuminate the screen. And this is particularly important on OLED displays, where again there's a lot of power management happening to ensure that there's enough brightness left over to illuminate the peak white. But again, if you're pushing data that's saying it needs to be bright, when something comes along that's really bright, there's less available to it, and either the display will create fluctuations in brightness in order to try and create that difference, or that extra brightness will never be achieved. So again, really good reason to make sure that you always play in a room that's suitable for HDR content, which is going to be nearly a black room. But again, the developers know that game content is played in lots of different conditions. So just to go through this, the HDR brightness setting, when we're at 50 here, this is equivalent of about 300 nits. Like I said, a little bit too bright for me. 40, by the time we drop it down to there, this is about the equivalent of 200 nits. 30, about 150. 20, sort of we're at 100 there, and then we can go even down to 75 and then 50, which is a really common value in video games as like the entry level point, which is probably too dark, to be honest. And it's going to be a little bit of a variance between different displays, between your own setup, where you are, what you're viewing, what processing your display is doing. But ultimately, as a rule of thumb that I use when I'm playing my games now, I tend to have the Paperwhite setting, if it's available, set somewhere between 100 and 200 nits, because the brighter we make it, the greyer the black's going to become. So I'm going to set mine here at 40 for this video, which gives us broadly 200 nits of Paperwhite. A couple of other settings that we see here: quality. I'm playing on an Xbox One X. This gives me a native 4K output, or actually if I want performance, I can actually get a 60 frames per second mode. But we're going to leave it on quality because you get some better reflections and some other things going on there, which for the sake of looking at visual quality, it makes sense to me. Forza Horizon 4 is going to be one of 2 racing games that I hope to look at in the near future. We've got Forza Horizon 4, which is a really great showcase game for showing off your display for a couple of reasons. And then we've got another game, Gran Turismo Sport on PlayStation 4, which does HDR in a slightly more reference-like way, I suppose. So that's really great for a different set of reasons. Both stunning games in their own ways. The reason that I really like Forza Horizon 4 as a title, beyond it being a really fantastic game anyway, you don't even need to like racing games to enjoy this. It's just a really fun game. One of the reasons I like it is that we have this huge variety of environments and different lighting conditions and different times of day. So there's a number of open world games that do this very well, but Forza Horizon 4 in particular is fantastic, because not only do we have that day and night cycle, but we have 4 separate seasons, and all of these different seasons have all kind of got their own atmospheric lighting conditions that all have their own look and feel. And as somebody who lives in the UK as well, it's also a game that's really easy for me to compare to real life. So this is the demo for Forza Horizon 4, and it actually starts off like this in the full game as well. So you can get the full games on Xbox Game Pass, which is a really cost-effective way if you want to play some new release Xbox games. It's like $6.99 a month. It's really reasonable. Or if you want to have a quick look at the demo's on the marketplace as well, and it will start off just as we have done here. But the demo's got full HDR support and everything, as we've seen. So what we can see off in the distance there is the sun over the mountains. We've set the game with the maximum output of 10,000 nits, just so we can see just how much detail is under there. And there's a lot of detail. These skyboxes have been photographed or videoed, I think, in HDR. So loads and loads of data there. And even if you can't see it on your own display, it is under there, and it means that in future we'll be able to have a look at that. Let's just pause it there for a second, or not pause it, but let's go into the photo mode. Just going to stop it before we get to the next section. Again, really beautiful game. But the thing that really kind of gets me with Forza Horizon is the huge variety of these different lighting conditions. So we're in the autumn at the moment. We can see the autumn blue sky, obviously, but the actual light coming down from the sun, the overall warmth of the image is really incredible. And if you're viewing this on a display with with a big color volume, you're really going to feel the saturation of that light. It's going to be very warm and very red. So we see that color volume being pushed through. So have this really, really huge color volume. So if you've got a display that's capable of displaying this color volume, so this is typically going to be LCD panels at this point in time, as that's actually one of their strengths. They have that high peak brightness, but alongside that peak brightness is colored light. So we've actually got the actual color volume underneath. LCD panels at the moment, really, really great at that. OLED panels, really, really great at the darks, not so good at the brights, but also because some of that brightness is being delivered with white LEDs, we don't actually get the same color volume. So again, different strengths and weaknesses that the displays have there. This is certainly one that looks great on both. And then later on down the line, when we've got even better displays, this will be one that looks even better. And I really look forward to going back to this game, maybe in 10 years time, and just seeing how does this old game look on a modern display. It's pretty cool. So we're going to come out of the autumn in a second, and it's going to change into a different season. Winter, there we are, comes after autumn. Not only is it a different time of year, so the actual lighting model has changed slightly to reflect the position of the sun and other atmospheric conditions, but it's also going to be darker generally. So we can see headlights, tail lights, you can see the signs in the distance there. Just go into photo mode here. Again, huge peak luminance coming out of the car headlights. We can actually see a little trick that they're using here on the reflection. You've actually got a real-time reflection of the car and you can see the headlights, but then to exaggerate, here we've got this reflection of the car where the reflection is matching the brightness. We can also see these two secondary light flares which are they kind of follow the car's headlights to kind of exaggerate the reflection. You'll see in the HDR analysis side here that the kind of fake highlights actually a lot brighter than the real-time one, so that is part of the game engine that's maybe not rendering in HDR, or certainly isn't being rendered with a relationship with the actual light source itself. But again, you probably wouldn't know that unless you were looking at the game running in 10,000 nits and looking at the underlying data, as we are there, because typically both of those light sources are going to be close to the maximum output of your display anyway, and we're just going to be rolling down that data. Let's come around here. We can see those flares all kind of glowing. We can see the very unique kind of colour light coming off the snow. Really beautiful game all the time. We can see the festival off in the distance there. It's all glowing and shiny in its own way. As we come through the festival here, you'll see different light sources. We can see really high peak brightness coming from the floodlights and a few other emissive sources. We can also see some other things that kind of, I guess, a little bit of kind of visual tricks. Some of these light sources aren't actually producing a huge amount of light. They look really great in the game, but some of them are maybe a little bit dimmer than they should be. Those LCD panels all glowing. Again, to the eye, looks really great. Just as a note for the future, playground games, maybe they should be a little bit more emissive. So again, we're going to change to another season here. We're off into the spring now. This is one of the times of year when my mind kind of gets confused by how great this game looks. When HDR is working well and working right, I get this sensation that's not entirely dissimilar to using a VR headset, or it's not entirely dissimilar to seeing high frame rate content or seeing that kind of soap opera effect, in that your brain has this moment of disparity between what you're used to seeing on a display and what you're used to seeing in real life. And there's something that almost feels real about it. It's not quite as, it's not upsetting like the soap opera effect can be in video, but it can certainly make things momentarily feel supernatural and super real. I think that's a really, one of the best things about HDR. but I notice it more often than not on these kind of spring sections. Again, the sky and the light and the light box really deliver this very natural sort of set of colour. You know, even on this kind of slightly less sunny, overcast day, we should see that the clouds and the sun are, you know, very, very bright. In the real world, we'd expect even the clouds on an overcast day to be, you know, be kind of 2000 nits. So you can kind of see just how far away we are from being able to achieve a real life image with current displays that we have. You know, currently we've got displays that couldn't show 2000 nits of full field brightness. Probably noticed as we went around the corner there that there was still a little bit of clipping on the skybox. Again, you know, probably reaching levels of brightness where we actually wouldn't be able to see that with our eyes. So it's not really too disruptive to us. So it kicks across into the summer. Again, another set of lighting conditions. Again, blue skies, white clouds as you might expect in the sky. Doesn't have that same warmth as the autumn does. But again, this looks like a British summer day. It looks distinctive to the spring that we see. And again, I think this is why I really like this game, is that it's really good at describing the world in which you are just through that lighting. Come round into the fields here. This is just what the scenery is like around where playground games are actually, which is really close to me. So I quite enjoy driving through this because it does actually look like the real world. Oh, that driving is not like me in the real world. But you should be seeing things here like the brake lights, and again, if I go to the front of the car, oh, I'm going to crash. Let's move that around to the front there. Again, we can see even in the daylight we've still got lights that are producing and emitting light, and those will be a different level of light to the cloud and to the brighter parts of the image, which is exactly what HDR is designed to deliver. So we're using less tricks and we're actually creating an image that is close to that of the real world. And I'm going to cross the finish line now. And it's going to try and sell me the game. I've already got the game, but we're playing the demo because the demo starts off here every single time, and I don't think I can get back to this bit from the main game, if you're wondering why we're using the demo. But anyway, that was my overall look at the HDR of Forza Horizon 4. As we said, it's really great. There's no like major glaring problems. In fact, there's none at all really. There have been a couple of little bugs throughout its life, but they've put those right. But really great game to play. It's great fun. It looks fantastic. Does a really great job of HDR. Now, go and have a look. Let me know what you'd like us to look at in future. And thank you for watching.